Hi, besties. And then there's it. Hi, besties. Hi, besties. Welcome to Vlog ni Best. So, yun nga. Ngayon nangala ko i-mix a vlog. Post na post pa ako. So, today we're gonna talk about the dental occlusion and the angles classification of malocclusion. So, I found a better and clearer way to explain it to you guys. So, let's start. Na tayo umimik masyado sa lalamunan ko.
Angles classification of malocclusion. Dental occlusion is the way in which teeth line up with each other as the jaw goes from open to close. So, malocclusion is when the teeth don't line up properly. Angles classification of malocclusion is a system used to categorize that the system bases everything on the position of the maxillary first permanent molar. It was designed this way because its creator Edward Angle believed that the maxillary first molar reliably stayed where it was after eruption, while the other teeth tended to have a bit more movement. In people who don't have maxillary first molars, he based the system on the location of the canines instead. In those who do have maxillary first molars, Angle's classification states that the mesial buccal cusp, which is the cusp at the intersection of the mesial and buccal sides of the tooth, normally lines up with the buccal side of the mandibular first molar's groove rather than right in the middle of the valley. In the canine system, the maxillary canine slides right down in between the mandibular canine and the mandibular premolar so that it sits half on the distal part of the mandibular canine and half on the mesial part of the mandibular premolar. In general, the teeth align on an imaginary arc called the line of occlusion. For the maxillary teeth, it runs through the central fossa of each posterior tooth and through the cingulum of each anterior tooth. As for the mandibular row, it runs through each buccal cusp of the posterior teeth and the sharp incisional edges on the anterior teeth. This produces a normal small overbite, which refers to the vertical distance that the maxillary central incisors hang over the mandibular central incisors. It also produces a normal small overjet, which refers to the horizontal distance that the maxillary central incisors. Angle's classifications of malocclusion are broken down into classes. In the molar system, Class 1 malocclusion is characterized by a mesial buccal cusp of the maxillary first permanent molar aligning with the mesial buccal groove of the mandibular first molar. Class 2 malocclusion, also called distocclusion, the mandibular teeth are distal to the maxillary teeth so that the mesial buccal cusp of the mandibular first molar is aligned with the buccal groove of the maxillary first molar. Class 3 malocclusion, also called mesial occlusion, is characterized by a mesial buccal cusp of the maxillary first permanent molar that aligns posterior to the mandibular first permanent molar's mesial buccal groove or in the embrasure between mandibular first and second molar. In the canine system, Class 1 is characterized by the maxillary canine's mesial inclined landing on the distal incline of the mandibular canine and similarly the distal incline of the maxillary canine colliding with the mandibular first premolar's mesial inclined. Angle's Class 1 is very common, but it can be complicated by other tooth or jaw abnormalities, which can result in overcrowding and alignment irregularities. This results in a normal mesognathic straight facial appearance from the side. Class 2 is characterized by the maxillary canine's mesial incline landing on the anterior portion of the distal incline of the mandibular canine and the distal surface of the mandibular canine, sitting at least one premolars with posterior to the maxillary canine's mesial surface. Class 2 malocclusion also has subtypes. Class 2 division 1 is characterized by proclined maxillary front teeth, meaning the bottoms of the teeth inclined forward, which gives them a protruding appearance. This results in an overjet of these teeth, often in the setting of an undersized mandible. Inch in the upper arc is said to resemble a V shape. Class 2 division 2 represents the opposite situation where the central incisors are retroclined or angle inwards toward the mouth and the lateral incisors can either have a normal incline or can be procline. The upper arc is typically wide and affected individuals have a deep overbite, usually the setting of a normal-sized mandible. There's also Class 2 Subdivision, which is where one side of the mouth has a class 2 occlusion, but the other side has a class 1 occlusion. Class 3 is characterized by the distal surfaces of the mandibular canines shifting so that they are anterior to the mesial surface of the maxillary canines by the width of at least 1 premolar. The mandibular incisors are also in a crossbite, meaning the mandibular canines have crossed under the midline of the maxillary molars and have become the more lingual of the two teeth. This can be caused by various irregularities including overcrowding of teeth. This results in a prognathic or concave facial appearance from the side. Class 3 has subtypes as well. True Class 3 malocclusion, also called skeletal subtype, is a genetic condition resulting in either a relatively small maxilla or a relatively large mandible. Pseudo Class 3 malocclusion, also called the postural or false subtype, is a result of an anterior shift in the mandible. This can result if the canines or incisors collide too early as the permanent teeth erupt and settle into their closure positions. This can also occur if the posterior deciduous or baby teeth are lost too early in life. Lastly, there's the Class 3 subdivision, where a Class 3 malocclusion occurs on one side of the mouth, while the other side of the mouth has a Class 1 occlusion. Recap. Reference.
Please like, share, and subscribe.